possible weakness with black men and Latino men is false if this poll is correct. The Harris campaign stressed that point about this poll in reaction to what they clearly regarded as a very good news poll for their campaign. The President of the United States became one of the 45 million Americans to vote early in the presidential election today when he cast his vote in Newcastle, Delaware, after waiting in line for 37 minutes. That is 37 minutes longer than Donald Trump would ever wait in line for anything. That is 37 more minutes of public humility than Donald Trump has exhibited in his 78 years of life. 3 months ago, President Joe Biden thought that he would be voting for himself today. He was asked what it felt like to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris instead of himself.
Bittersweet for you?
Oh, this is just sweet.
This is just sweet. We have never had a more decent person than Joe Biden serve as President of the United States. And we have never had a more indecent person in that job than Donald Trump.
Mr. President, can you come here and comment on former President Trump's rally yesterday? He was saying a bunch of stuff about immigrants.
Just simply embarrassing. It's beneath any president, but that's what we're getting used to. That's why this election is so important. You know, most of the presidential scholars I've spoken to talk about the single most consequential thing about a president's character. Character. And he puts that in question every time he opens his mouth.
Trump campaign apologists spent the day trying to distance Donald Trump from some of the featured players on the stage at a Donald Trump rally at Madison Square Garden last evening. The racism flowed freely from the mouths of well-known and unknown racists. Tucker Carlson, who is far less educated than Kamala Harris and obviously less intelligent than anyone who has ever run for president not named Trump, tried to insult Vice President Harris's education and intelligence in classically racist language that he would not even be allowed to say on Fox if he hadn't been fired from what turned out to be his temporary job there. A so-called comedian no one has ever heard of was also blatantly racist with especially poisonous language about Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican people. He said that in a city where more Puerto Ricans live than anywhere outside of Puerto Rico. Both Tucker Carlson and the comedian no one's ever heard of would have been very much at home at the 1939 Nazi Party rally at Madison Square Garden that occurred 2 years before Nazi leader Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States. Imagine how racist the Trump event had to be for the New York Times to headline their report, "A Closing Carnival of Grievances, Misogyny, and Racism in New York City." Donald Trump inadvertently proved himself a liar yesterday about New York City. He held a rally in the belly of the beast, Midtown Manhattan, the heart of New York City. 20,000 people came. 20,000 people who have been told by Donald Trump that they have a 75% chance of being murdered if they enter the New York City subway system. And that's how most of them got to Madison Square Garden. On the same New York City subway system that Donald Trump says will murder them. 20,000 Trump supporters went to the center of a city where they are surrounded by millions and millions of immigrants. Over 3 million immigrants in New York City, where the population is 38% immigrants. That's not counting the children of those immigrants who were born here. The people who Donald Trump insists poison blood. They poison the blood of this country. That's what Donald Trump says. A pure Hitler echo. That's what all the Nazis in Madison Square Garden believed in 1939. They believed that Jewish people would poison the blood of any country, including this one. When Donald Trump finally got up to the microphone in Madison Square Garden, he said this to his 20,000 fanatics in the room.
The United States is now an occupied country, but it will soon be an occupied country no longer. Not going to be happening. Not going to be happening. November 5th, 2024, 9 days from now, will be Liberation Day in America. It's going to be Liberation Day. On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
The 20,000 Trump fanatics in the room know that this is not an occupied country. Many or most of them live in suburbs where they have absolutely no hint of being occupied. There is no place in the United States more occupied by immigrants than New York City. And that has always been true. There are more immigrants currently living in New York City than there are people in both of the Dakotas combined. And not one of those immigrants who were everywhere around Madison Square Garden had a single harsh word for any of those racists who went to Madison Square Garden to lie about them. There was no violence, none. No Trump supporter angrily going after a suspected immigrant. No liberal New Yorkers getting in arguments with the Trump supporters, not a single punch thrown. No one cared. No liberal New Yorkers cared that the Trump fanatics were there, and the Trump fanatics didn't care that they were in the heart of what Donald Trump calls occupied territory. No Trump fanatics were afraid to be there because they had no reason to be afraid. They were in one of the safest places in America, New York City. That's what Trump and his fanatics proved yesterday, just how safe New York City is. Just a few blocks away from the Trump racism carnival, Kenneth Branagh was doing King Lear. In other words, it was just another day in New York. You can come here to New York City and publicly insult the millions of people living here, or clap for someone spewing racist hysteria about millions of people who live here, and nothing will happen to you. Nothing. No one has to protect you, because New Yorkers have seen it all and heard it all, and because New York City and the United States of America are not the places Donald Trump says they are. They are very different places than what Donald Trump describes to his followers, and 20,000 of his fanatics discovered yesterday that Donald Trump has been lying to them about New York City. New York City proved to Donald Trump and to the world yesterday that Donald Trump has been lying about New York. When Donald Trump and his most racist public supporters and his most fanatical followers gathered in the very heart of New York City, no one cared. And not a single Trump supporter had a moment of fear, not a moment of fear in the entire experience, because that's how safe and accommodating New York City is. Donald Trump, of all people, proved that about New York City yesterday. And while New Yorkers were ignoring the 20,000 fanatics who hate them gathered at Madison Square Garden, more than 10 times that number of people were voting for president in New York City. 258,000 votes were cast in New York City on what was the first weekend of early voting, according to normal voting patterns. More than 200 of those votes would go to Kamala Harris. That's what New Yorkers were doing while they were ignoring the racism carnival at Madison Square Garden. They were voting for Kamala Harris, the candidate who was being attacked in Madison Square Garden because she is black and because she is a woman. And today, here's what's happening in that same subway system where Donald Trump says you have a 75% chance of being murdered just by walking down the stairs. Here's what I saw on that very safe subway system on the way to work today. The luckiest people in town on their way to the Yankees World Series game in the Bronx. A Yankees World Series game is a collection of some of the very richest people in New York City. Those Yankees World Series tickets are not cheap. And those rich people go to the World Series at Yankee Stadium on the subway because that is how safe it is and because no one in New York City believes Donald Trump's lies about this being an occupied country. We're going to be joined later in this program, as I said, by Texas Senate candidate Colin Allred, who took the stage in Houston Friday night before Beyonce and Kamala Harris spoke.
Many of y'all probably know where you were on January 6th. I know where I was. I was on the House floor doing my job. I remember when they locked all the doors. We borrowed the doors the president walks through to deliver the State of the Union with furniture that we usually use to hold paper. I texted my wife, Allie, who was 7 months pregnant with our son, Cameron, "Whatever happens, I love you." Because we're the only former NFL linebacker in the room, and there's a mob at the door. Everybody's like, "What you gonna do, Colin?" And I went to public school in Texas. I'm not just gonna sit there. So I took off my suit jacket. And I was prepared to defend the House floor from that mob. That's what happened. At the same time, after he'd gone around the country lying about the election, after he'd been the objector to the results in Arizona, Ted Cruz was hiding in a supply closet.
Cowardice really is a Republican brand now, especially when it comes to fear of people they don't know. They aren't just afraid of immigrants, even though we all came from immigrants, but they are now afraid of everyone who does not vote for Donald Trump. That is what Donald Trump now calls the enemy within. Donald Trump has promised to prosecute anyone who has contributed money to the Democratic presidential campaign. That's millions of people. Donald Trump has said he wants to prosecute everyone who supports the Harris for President campaign, everyone who votes for Kamala Harris. That's going to be about 80 million people. It is madness, of course, and it is impossible. But Trump supporters and Donald Trump obviously are intellectually incapable of figuring out which of Donald Trump's hateful plans are impossible to actually carry out. Vice President Harris commented today on the Trump racism carnival at Madison Square Garden.
Donald Trump this is not new about him, by the way. What he did last night is not a discovery. It is just more of the same and maybe more vivid than usual. Donald Trump spends full time trying to have Americans point their finger at each other, fans the fuel of hate and division, and that's why people are exhausted with him. That's why people who formerly have supported Donald Trump, have voted for him, are supporting me, voting for me.
Michelle Obama made her first campaign appearance for Kamala Harris in Kalamazoo, Michigan on Saturday. She asked for forgiveness for being a little frustrated and even a little angry.
Whether it's online or in the media or in our social circles, there are folks who say they're not sure about Kamala. They accuse her of not providing enough policy detail. Some wonder, do we really know her? Is she too aggressive? Is she not aggressive enough? There are folks sowing